Afternoon and welcome to episode 10 of International Expansion Explained. My guest today is Stirling Austin, and Stirling is in the business of creating multilingual websites. So, over the years, he's created, managed, sold, acquired, and merged all kinds of businesses, manufacturing, service, distribution businesses, not only in the UK, but also in France and across Europe. And he's also started 4 companies and 2 business units from scratch. These days, he's based in Manchester, where he runs Pixel Executive, which is a web design agency which specializes, as I mentioned, in building multi-language websites for companies who are expanding into new international markets. Thank you for joining me this afternoon.
Good to be here. That was a great intro.
Yeah, almost as if you'd prepared it, wasn't it?
Oh, well, yes, such an ad libber.
Yeah, that's me. That's me. But how? But let's just kick it off by you explaining a little bit, not only what you do, but how did you actually get or fall maybe into international business? And how did you arrive at the point that you are at today? Because I mean, obviously, you've had a few twists in the road from what I know about you.
Yes, I have. I've had an extremely eclectic career path, and it's not over yet. Who knows what I shall turn into next? How did I get into international business? So it all started when I was a young lad in London, and I worked for a business that a computer cleaning products manufacturing business who wanted to expand into Europe. And essentially they sent me off to go and build up their European distributor network. So that was my first taste of going out and talking to different companies in, setting up German distributors and Austrian distributors and so on and so on. So that was my first foray into international business. So I built up that network over about 6 years. And then a woman came along, because there's sometimes a woman involved. My ex-wife is French, and it all started there. So one of my suppliers offered me the chance to go and start a business for them in Paris. They were in computer products. And I started up the French subsidiary of a UK PLC. We moved there lock, stock and barrel because obviously the whole family was over there. And I spent 10 years building up that business, got to a fairly big size, about 120 people. We acquired a couple of companies along the way. And that was really my, let's say, my initiation by fire into working in a foreign country. I didn't speak French much when I got there, but I refused to speak English to anybody, which was fine because they all worked for me anyway, so they didn't have a choice. So it was quite difficult for them, but it was great for my French. And that was where I really kind of got going in terms of understanding how to do business internationally, at least as a Brit living and working in another country in another language. It's a different culture. It's a different mindset. Everything is different. And I did that for 10 years. I then left that business, started my own interim management business because I did some short-term interim management assignments. I started up a company in France, sold it 5 years later, came back to the UK. This is where it gets fun. I started yet another business with doing placing multilingual executives. And the business in France was specializing in interim managers for French and UK companies, so bilingual interim managers. And then I decided to, after selling the business, I decided to give it all up for a while and become a full-time professional musician in the UK. So if anybody looks online, don't do it now, because this will get more interesting first. And I became a professional musician for best part of 12 years. I gave up corporate life completely. Highly recommended to anybody to take a midlife break. And About 4 or 5 years ago, I thought, right, time to get back into a more traditional business. And I started looking around for something that I could do, a little bit of international business development for a couple of French firms over here. And I'd been messing around with websites for a few years just because I'm a tinkerer, and I like building things and dragging widgets around and doing all this sort of stuff. Along comes lockdown, and thank you, Kate. Absolutely. Well done for refusing to speak English. And I thought, right, I want to find something that's a cross between business and creative. Lockdown came along and the events business closed down overnight. I had no choice. So it kicked off the company that I have today, which is Pixel Executive. It's a small web design business. Where does the international side come in? I'm trilingual. I've spent probably half of my life outside the UK. My family speaks in Franglais. Um, my wife is Finnish. Um, my whole life is to do. I have an international network of friends, and in terms of business, I've got international clients. Always have had, always will do. So it seemed to me to make natural sense to niche down into multi-language websites. I build English language websites, but what I really enjoy is getting into the teeth, getting my teeth into a business where we're talking about where are you exporting to, who you're exporting to, why are you trying to expand internationally, what languages are we talking about. So from a technical point of view and a business development point of view, I really enjoy it.
Yeah. Which isn't necessarily the typical thing for a Brit, is it? Especially not to go to France. I mean, I know Susan has spent time in France as well, and there's a few people who I can see a few of the people who I can see are watching, who I know also are quite fluent in French. It being that first one that we get in school, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people are
Yeah.
good at it, does it? So
No, well, you have to, I'll say this diplomatically, well, I'm not going to apologize to any French
no,
actors.
we
I'm
don't
French as
apologise
well.
for having
No, who
the
wants to
occasional
apologize
dig at the
to French?
French. It's nothing bad-tempered. It's just
Yeah, I think, most people's attitude is, the rest of the world speaks English. We all know about that, business English. It's not true. And, we all tend to speak louder or try and speak like this. Do you understand what I'm saying? But the truth of it is that you can do business internationally just with English. But when you get down to the second level of management, the second and third level of management, or just people who are employees, do not speak English at a business level. So if you're, websites aside, you just can't get by. So I purposely stayed away from all the expats in La Défense. I just avoided them. And the result was that a few years later, there's a whole persona in French. And obviously, I've tended to gravitate towards building websites in French, first of all. So that's absolutely. It was a great one. Thank you, Beth, for the compliment about the guitars. Yes, we can come back to that later.
so. Would you say that a multilingual website is the first step for most companies if they're looking to expand abroad?
Yes.
It's kind of a very basic question, but yeah.
Well, I would say the way I would look at it now is that these days technology has no borders, and it's a very low cost or sort of low investment level to get your online presence multi-language. So for me, it's a no-brainer. Although you would be surprised at the amount of companies who've said to me, and there's quite a few who've said to me, well, we haven't got the budget for it yet. We want to sell internationally. And I say, well, so how much money would you actually spend on putting somebody, into another country? They'd spend, they might spend 100, 150,000 just putting somebody boots on the ground. The cost of putting another few languages on your website is ridiculous. But that's to do with the island mentality of the Brits and of the Americans. So if you go to France, So if we were sitting in France and we're having this conversation, or Germany or Austria, and we were talking about, what's the best way of getting our products to other countries, there would be absolutely no question that we need to put the site into English.
Yep.
So if a Frenchman's sitting there and he's saying, I won't caricature the French at this stage. I'll stay polite.
We'll start out polite, at least.
I'll start out polite and say, so what do you think, Jean-Claude? How are we going to export? Well, the first thing we need to do is put our site in English, because nobody's going to want. Can you imagine somebody coming to the UK and having a site in French? It's laughable.
Yeah.
And it never fails to amaze me how many companies I come across that do export business. And they might say, oh, well, they don't have a website in another language or in the language of the countries that they're selling to. Now, the argument might be, well, we don't need to because our clients speak English. Okay, so only those clients that you deal with speak English. What about building your brand? So for me, yeah, it's such a low cost. It's a no-brainer. I think the biggest issue that I find is education rather than cost. Because once you explain the value to somebody, you say, look, 20 years ago, you had to send somebody abroad, you had to, set them up with an office, you had to do all this. These days, you've got internationalization firms and you've got payroll firms, and you don't even need to set up another company in another country, a foreign company. They will do everything for you. So it's much easier to do it, but I think it's more to do with education than anything else.
Yeah. And Kate was mentioning that she's worked on quite a few multilingual website projects, and the challenge is often, let's say, more of a cultural one rather than an actual linguistic one, strictly speaking.
Yes. I mean, my way of looking at that is that so everything comes down to discovery with the client. If I talk to a client and they say to me, well, these are our products, this is what we want to say, this is how we sell. Obviously, I'm looking at it from an English language point of view. I only speak a couple of other languages, so I'd want them to be talking to a translator who knows how to convey the message and the tone of voice. So you might say, you say in English, we might say, engage with your clients, promote your brand internationally. So if you tried to literally say that in French or German or whatever, it just wouldn't sound the same if you translate literally. So you're not just translating it. And obviously I know that this is obvious to all the translators out there, but it's not just about translating it for that other language. It's actually maybe even saying something completely different, which conveys the same message. So yeah, I think the as long as I've got the ability to say to the ability, I suppose, to say to the client, look, if there are images that need to be changed, if there are sections that need to be rewritten, your translator needs to be aware of that. It's not about a translator who knows how to translate. It's about a translator who knows how to, let's say, transcreate, somebody who knows how to say something. When you're selling, as you know, I'm just talking about French and Germans, but let's talk about, Middle Eastern people have a totally different way of doing business in terms of the mentality, et cetera, et cetera. In Israel, everything's done over WhatsApp. They have Gmail address.
Everything's done on WeChat. It's in the same way that the Israelis use WhatsApp, the Chinese would use WeChat. So
yes, exactly. And Gmail address, in Israel, in some countries, a Gmail address is perfectly acceptable for business. Over here, they'd say, "Oh, you've got a Gmail address? That's a bit dodgy." Yep. So I think all of those things, yeah, it's I'm just trying to read the comments at the same time. I'm a man, so I'm not multitasking. I can't multitask, but yeah, absolutely. Petit beurre. Oh, that's Yeah, I'm a ginger nut, actually. Okay. Over to you, Catherine.
So, yeah, lots of people commenting that it's important to have that good localization and to have somebody who's specialized on it for doing making sure they've got the copywriting right. But do you have this kind of conversation with your clients before you start out on a website project, that there might be stuff that they actually need to change about their English website before you start on that localization project for the, or do their marketing departments usually have that under control?
Well, I'll be very honest. Most of my clients don't have a marketing department, but it's mostly smaller clients. Anything from people with 3 people in companies with 3 people in the business up to maybe 50, 60. That's tended to be most of the firms that I've dealt with. I think the way it starts for me is that I suppose I always start with business objectives first, and I try to say to the client, look, let's talk about web design later. Let's talk about what you're trying to do and what the website's got to say, and then we can take into account how it says it to different countries. And then I think the way that I try to cover it is that I would always recommend a global design. So trying to get a design which is global on the website. You can always take away certain sections, change sections, but if you have icons and colors which fit everywhere, then it's much easier to manage the website.
Yeah.
One of the issues with building multi-language websites is that once you change one thing in one version of the language, there's a ripple effect at the back end technically, and you've got to go and change everything. And that's fine, that's not a problem, except that it costs the client a lot more money every time they change if you don't set it up properly.
Yeah.
So for me, it's more about saying to the client, let's talk about a global design first, if at all possible. Obviously, you wouldn't have the same picture of people in the office, let's say in, I don't know, Bahrain as you would in France. Another anecdote, I remember, anybody who's old enough here to remember what brochures are, and I once made a brochure for the recruitment business, and then somebody in the office said to me, "Why have you got British middle-aged executives in the pictures?" And then it occurred to me that I'd gone straight to Getty Images, and I'd got the images of all these people with braces on or whatever they had, suspenders in America. And suspenders, of course, in America is completely different to suspenders over here in Britain, not to be confused.
No, not to be confused.
You can
One
get
is
in
acceptable in
trouble.
business, the other one you don't really want to show, do you? So
I don't want to show you suspenders in the
no.
no, absolutely. And so it's those sort of things that it's the subtleties which I think are really important. But I think it's more, for me, it's more to do, coming back to your original question. I mean, for me, it is definitely a no-brainer having a multi-language website. It's the cheapest and easiest way to start building your brand abroad. And braces are very different in Canada and the US. Yes, thanks, Catherine. Yes, they are. That's right. That's why they say brace yourself in the UK. I'll stop at that. So yeah, I think, multi-language websites is really quite, I do find it quite exciting, but I find it even more challenging to actually convince people as to the benefits. But that's because, as I say, we have this island mentality. We have the English as the language of business. But if you're sitting, in Europe, people don't have that mentality.
No, not so much. And people also, if you're based in continental Europe, there are a lot more people who are multilingual. It's not just linguists who are multilingual, it's it's the general person on the street who, if he wants to, I'm not saying that your average Frenchman on the street would like to talk English to you, but he could if he wanted in many cases, having had that level of schooling. Whereas for us, let's face it, these days it's not even compulsory to learn a language at all beyond a couple of years in school, is it? So
no, absolutely. I mean, again, I suppose it's you know, it's always going to be there, that issue in terms of that island mentality, and I also think that unfortunately it affects the translation industry a lot, because I don't think people value translators who can translate commercially as much. That's very much the yes, yeah. Sorry, I'm just reading Catherine's comment there. Yeah, absolutely, and suspenders, in suspenders. So Catherine, stop putting me off. Right.
not me, the other one.
Yeah, exactly. I've lost my train of thought there. Yes, it is. Yeah, you're right. It is more, as Kate says, it's more culturally acceptable to learn languages in Europe as it is here.
Yeah.
So I think the as I say, the translation industry, for example, it's not given as much importance in terms of costings. People are constant. I've had a lot of conversations, obviously, with people who do translations, and obviously you'll get companies saying, well, how much per word? But how much per word is not the point. It's how, if I know how to say something in a different language, that's not translation. That's more than translation.
Yeah.
And I think that's, and because of this mentality, I know we're not talking about multilingual websites, but it's connected.
Yeah.
It's so undervalued, and that's such a shame.
But I think that undervaluing, I'm sure that there are people on here. I've seen that we've got people on from Italy and Pakistan, and I know also from US, Canada. Mariona is in the UK, but she's Spanish, and I'm sure that almost everybody would say that translation as an industry is undervalued almost everywhere, and that companies expect that it's just a quick job to translate something, the equivalent of put it into Google Translate and push button, and that this is something that doesn't need too much time and that is quite cheap. And so often it comes at the back end of a project and then it comes back to bite them, simply because they've got this preconception that it's, let's say that it's a very easy task rather than being something that is ultra specialized.
Absolutely, and I think so let's bring it back to websites. You obviously, and I know this is the obvious again, but you can have a great website, but if what you're saying on the website, whatever language you've got, if it's not saying it right, then it's not going to do the job. A website, at the end of the day, I look at a website as, it's a bit like, to use the American term, it's like an online elevator pitch. For you British people, that's a lift. So the thing is, when you get into the elevator and you've got a couple of floors, you've got 1 minute, somebody turns to you and says, what do you do? And you've got 1 minute, and that, or even less than that, you've got 30 seconds, 45 seconds to say what you've got to say and make that impression. And that could lead to something. You never know who's in the elevator. And it's the same with websites, because when people get on websites, especially if they've gone on to Google, they've done a search, they've got the 5 or 6 first results, organic or paid for, they're clicking in and out. They may be clicking in and out. So you've got 45 seconds. It's like an online elevator pitch. What you say when they get on that site is so important. How you say it, whatever language you say it in, it's the same thing. So I think websites for me are, a lot of the time far too fancily designed. There's far too much text on them. At the end of the day, websites, less is more, I think, makes more sense. They are there for a purpose. They're not there to look good. Websites are there to do a job. And it's like having, as I say, a virtual salesperson. So if you imagine that you employed somebody and then that person was sitting in front of a client and they physically presented, a website is exactly the same thing. It's just that it's virtual. So when it comes back to multi-language websites, it's the same thing in every language.
Yeah. No, I think it's always very interesting to see how people are working and to realize just how many misconceptions there are out there about websites, localization, and the whole of the kind of associated industries and professions that are on there, because it often really is underestimated how much value or how much damage that can actually do to your business if you get it wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, anybody who's ever worked with me knows that I don't just accept copy from clients if it doesn't make sense to me. And, obviously in English or in French for that matter, or in Hebrew. But because I think, and here's another one of my beefs, how do you say beef in American? Like my things that
Pet peeves, I don't know. I have
pet
no idea.
peeves. Come on, Americans, tell me that, put me right. Is that I think the job also of a web designer is not. It's a bit of an oxymoron, actually. It's not really just to design something. It's to make sure that it makes sense. Pet peeve. Thank you, Catherine. It's to make sure that it makes sense in terms of their business.
Yeah.
So let's talk about copywriting. And if I receive copy, bearing in mind that if I receive, I'm bringing it back to multi-language, if I receive copy in English, I know that that content is going to be translated into the other languages. So I'm looking at the structure of the site and they're saying, well, we want a home page and we want an about page and we want a this page and a that page. So the first thing I'll do is I'll say, well, why? Why? Is that just how you think it should look in your mind? Can you sell me your company? And then let's structure the website around how you would sell me your company. And then let's build the content and then let's design around the content. And I think I'll go out on a limb here and say that a lot of web designers just design you a website.
Yeah.
They're nothing about your business, and they don't not really bothered about learning about your business. And I will not design a website unless I've done a discovery call with a client and unless I understand about their business. And I think that's really important, because especially in the case of multi-language websites, if we've then got to take the way it's structured in English, that's going to be extrapolated over 5 or 6 languages. It's got to make sense. The navigation's got to make sense. The user experience has got to make sense. So I think there's a lot more which goes in. I'm on general websites, I know now, but I think I think there's a lot more than just saying, oh, well, we've got a fancy globe which is spinning around, and then we've got, something flying across the top of the screen, and we've got this amazing mood board and these amazing colors and so on and so on. That's all very well, but I think web design is actually calming down a little bit now, where some people are beginning to say, I don't need amazing elaborate websites. What I need is a website that basically has a good color scheme, it's well laid out, it has a good interface. That's I think that's where web design should go now. And the more widgets and motion graphics and flying icons and floating whatnots that software that plugin manufacturers bring out, the worse it is for businesses. So yeah, absolutely.
But I think a lot of companies, the time when they start to go global and expand to a multilingual website, that is maybe in some ways the first time that their website has actually had a proper overhaul since they started, because they probably started with something basic and then kept adding stuff onto it till it became this kind of Frankenstein kind of creation without having had that, what is the overarching architecture that we actually need to do the job, and just kept adding bits and adding bits rather than sitting down with a blank sheet of paper and thinking again, okay, if we did it again from scratch, what would be the actual best way of going through this project?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, what that brings to mind for me is that, in the same way that, if you've bought a family saloon car, you can't suddenly retroactively fit a turbo to it, and you can't do that with websites either. So if you've built, unless you've structured it in the right way at the start, so on the one hand, although today technology has moved on so far that you do not need a team of hooded designers sitting in a small room somewhere to be able to custom code a multi-language website that every time you want to change 3 words, you have to go past and pay them $50 just for the privilege. Those days are gone now.
Yeah.
You can build a very sophisticated multi-language site in WordPress, or in a number of other platforms, and the cost is not high, but if we talk about the platform and the technology, if you don't build it correctly from the ground up with multi-language in mind, then 2 things will happen. One is it becomes a complete mess at the back end, and the other thing is it costs the client a lot more money.
Yeah. And
And
time, of course.
yeah, because every time you have to change something, and I have had clients come to me and say, I want you to add languages to my site, and I say, no, I'll rebuild it for you. And they say, won't that cost more? And I say, well, no, it will actually cost you less, because by the time you've paid me to fix and to rejig and say, it's just not practical. But that's not so much an issue. I think, as I say, once a client has got it into their mind that they're happy and that they need to go with a multi-language website, and they are happy to take the advice of somebody who ideally specializes in it, not always the case. So, for example, I built a site recently for a money transfer company, and they are about to put their site, so it's in English at the moment. They specialize in money transfers to the Gambia, that's specialist if nothing else, and Senegal. And there's a diaspora, a Senegalese and Gambian diaspora in different parts of the world. So they want their site in Swedish, Italian, German, French, and I think one other language. So I thought to myself, right, 5 languages down the road, they're going to come back to me. They're going to say, Stirling, we've got a list of we've got a table which is on one of the pages, or there's 2 tables which you can sort of flick between, and you can look up all the agents that are either agents or branches of our company, and we need to be able to change that. Now that table in itself is going to be in 5 or 6 different languages, and they are going to want to change the table. So setting all of that up, if you think about it right at the start, you'll cause your client will be a lot happier later. The difficulty, and I'm on a bit of a soapbox here now, is that Mr. Client in Manchester, Leeds, wherever, will go, oh, well, I'll just speak to Kevin down the road. He knows, I'm sure he speaks a bit of Spanish, he'll be able to make my website multilingual. Or what we'll do, actually, even better, we don't need to make the whole site multilingual. We'll do some micro pages. And you go onto these sites. I'm sorry, I'm on a soapbox now, but you go onto these sites and they've got, it's like, I've seen some law firms like this as well. It's appalling. You got the really nice website, very nicely built for this law firm. And then you've got a little sign for Chinese and a little sign for German. You got one page which drops down. So I'm thinking to myself, well, what's that going to do for you? And you're a law firm. It's not like you don't have the budget.
That was just what I was about to say, but then I figured, we've had to go at the French. We can start on lawyers now, can't we?
Yeah, let's go for lawyers now. Patent attorneys. There's another one. Patent attorneys who say we want more briefs from Asia. We want briefs from Europe. People coming into the UK. Now that B has happened, you've got all those questions about international patents. Will it change in terms of Europe? The fact that we've got we may even have different laws in terms of trademarks and so on and so on. So it used to be very easy. You can do it all in one go. Patent attorneys is a great market for me. I'm still trying to get into it properly, but they put on the website, we have offices in Seoul, etc., 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 and they have a website in English. So it may just be that they don't need to have their website in another language. But here's the thing. If they did put their website into another language, just think of what it would do for their brand in that country for somebody who says, we're starting up a business in the UK or in the States. Already, even if it's a showcase language, so the languages on my site, it's not I've got 5 languages. I don't have an office in, I don't know, Kuwait. Well, I probably wouldn't anyway. Not yet. But it's purely for show. It's purely to show. It's a showcase to say this is what I'm able to do. And likewise, I think with lots of clients, you can start building a brand, and it's much easier to do it. Somebody mentioned before about here it is, Mariona. It's absolutely true. It also basically Mariona is saying that depending on what tech you use, it's harder to set up a site. WordPress is much more user friendly, but yes, it does depend on what functionalities your website needs to have. So if you're doing a static website, honestly, if you know what you're doing, it's very, very straightforward. There's a small number of plugins with WordPress that work very well. Some of them are easier to manage than others. When it comes to e-commerce sites, when it comes to more complex functionality, yes, that's when it gets more difficult. But then I think that's where people are prepared to pay for the budget. I'll give you an example. If I was to count the hours that I've spent learning how to play around with multi-language plugins at the back end of the website, I would say a very big percentage of the time I've spent tearing my hair out was trying to get the full stop on a right to left language to sit in the right place. Now this is how I would spend my time until 2 o'clock in the morning. It's great fun, I can tell you. So let's say you're taking an English language page and you're putting it in Arabic or Hebrew. So obviously you've got a right to left language there. The problem is not the plugin. The problem is that you take your Word document, let's say you copy it into a text document, which then takes away the code that is hidden in a Word document around the text, the formatting. So then you've got raw code, and then you put it into the translation panel into the Arabic version of the English page on the website. But with certain plugins, it still puts it back to the start of the sentence. So you've got to go in and manually type it in. And, it's all those sort of things. I think that it sounds like nothing, but knowing who you deal with when you're dealing with multi-language websites. A slight plug there, sorry.
What questions for example, what questions should a company be asking a potential vendor in order to sort out who is a good fit for me? What kind of things? I mean, because there are a lot of people out there who offer to build websites and who offer to make them SEO friendly and all of this kind of malarkey. But of course, there's a lot of technical stuff. I mean, Kate was asking whether you've ever done a local website in Wolof or in other African languages. And I mean, I'm guessing some of those languages you've also got, I mean, even if you just go from English to German, you've got that question of you need more space for the German language, because it's just all of those ridiculously long words just need a lot of space.
Yeah.
So what kind of questions should any company who's just starting out and thinking that they need to have a multilingual website, what kind of questions should they be asking somebody to find out if that person is a good fit for them, other than to have a discussion with them and to see whether they can actually bear to work with the person? Because I'm a big fan of, if you can't bear to have dinner with somebody, you shouldn't be doing more than a very small project with them, kind of thing. So
absolutely. Well, I think the first question that I would expect anybody to ask me or anybody else who's going to design a multi-language website is, what experience do you have of international business? Now, I'm not saying that a web designer who's never worked internationally can't build a multi-language website. That's not what I'm saying, because obviously I would have hundreds of web designers all bearing down on my house with machetes saying this is not true. However, I would expect them to at least look for somebody who has specialization and who understands about building something from the ground up. So, for example, if I had any kind of business where I had let's say I was in engineering and I wanted somebody to build a software platform for me, and it was specific to my manufacturing process, I would go towards software companies who have built for manufacturing companies. So for me, the first thing is, does your web designer have any inkling of doing what international business is about? Because if they don't, they're not going to understand about putting different images on different sites. They're not going to understand about different colors for icons. They're not going to understand about tone of voice. They're not going to understand about the fact that when you start building the English site, you say to the client, sign off the English first, and then give me the other languages. I'm not building it until you do that. Because if they give you the German page, then all of a sudden your design gets pushed out. So you got to go back to the English page. And then the client says, well, why are you taking so long to build the website? It's because you don't know how to work in the first place. So I think that's the first thing, is what experience do you have of working at international level? So I'm not saying you can't, but like anything, if you go with somebody who understands that. The second part of it is that I do think that web designers should learn about business, putting it bluntly. So I'm not a born geek. You know, I've been a commercial person all my life, and I came to web design really only a short while back. Yes, I have spent, in another incarnation, I've done advanced Google PPC courses. I've done, you know, as I say, PPC management, SEO. I've done all that sort of stuff in some projects that I did before I did websites. But essentially, I came to it from a commercial background. And the questions that you ask as a commercial person for a business, I think, relate much more to how you will design that website. So if you took, I'm not sure whether I should say this now, I'm going to get pillaged here. Okay, let's say I'm purely a designer and I use Figma or Adobe XD or what, right? So there's a program that you can make these amazing designs in Adobe XD. But actually putting that on a website is another ball game. Depends on coding, it depends on your page builder, depends on a lot of things. And then that translates through to how that would work for all the other languages and how complex your site is to build. So I think in the same way, the questions that I would ask somebody is, Do you understand what I'm trying to do as a business internationally? Just a little understanding. You may have worked in an international business. That may be all that you need. But if you've got a monoglot provider of services who's never dealt with anybody outside the UK or the US, I would question why you would go to them to build a multi-language website. It might look very nice, but there's a lot of subtleties that can just get you that sale, that can do a better job. What else? What else would I ask? The technical side is important, but most clients don't really understand, and to be honest, they don't care. You know,
They just want it to work, don't they?
yeah,
I mean,
yeah, yeah. The
it's
moment you start talking about plugins and all that, their eyes just glaze over, and they say, "Oh, just build it," just build it.
it's got to
Which,
work. It's got to be fast. It's got to load fast, because that's the other thing about multilingual websites, isn't it? If they don't load fast enough because they've got too many fancy bits on them, and they
yes,
want.
somebody made a point actually before
Yes, I think it was
about
Catherine.
load. Well, Catherine, yes, totally agree. I think this is where you know web design is kind of, there's a perception that web design is becoming more elaborate and that you can do more. But again, I'm kind of repeating myself. I really think less is more when it comes to websites. So the simplest websites with nice color schemes can look nice. So let's take an example. If you related it to clothes, you don't necessarily have to dress up in amazingly eclectic fashion in a fashionable way. If you had a simple set of clothes that made you look respectable for wherever you were, whether if you're going to a party, obviously it's different, but if you're in business, there's you're not going to dress in the same way that you're going to a rave as if you're going into the office. Well, some people might actually, but and I think it's all appropriate to what you're trying to do. So yeah, there's far too many people trying to get clever with fancy widgets on websites, and what that does is it simply stops the site from loading faster. And especially with multi-language sites, when you've got multi-language sites, you don't actually have 5 times the weight of site, but multi-language sites can get bloated because you've got, in a sense, 5 times the instructions being written. Let's say if you've got a 5-language website at the back end in the database. So yeah, loading time is important. But like I say, if you set it up right in the first place, you would take that into account in the first place. What's
Yeah,
this?
Kate was also mentioning that just because it's simple at the front end doesn't mean that it's easy to build, because simplicity can be often really quite difficult to achieve.
Absolutely, but for me, the way I would approach that, I mean, it's not easy, but I think it's about making it as sound as simple as possible for the client, and often trying to convince them. So if somebody gives me a page of text and there's like just a load of copy and loads of sections, I'll tell them straight out. I'll say there's just far too much text here, just far too much text. Do you want to? Because let's bring it on to mobile. And again, I've got away from multi-language, but let's talk about just websites generally. People, if you're looking at designing a website, in the back of your mind, you need to have an image of somebody on a mobile phone, which is probably about 50% of the people.
Or more,
So,
depending
or
on what
more.
you're offering, it could even be more than that, couldn't it? So
Yeah, so I said to somebody the other day who was going to provide me with some visuals, can you design for mobile first? And the person said, what do you mean? And I said, well, think about it on a mobile phone and then let's build the rest. I'm not suggesting we would build the mobile first, but it's a bit like reverse engineering.
yeah,
What is it I'm trying to achieve on a mobile phone? How can I make that work on a desktop so that it makes my life easy to make it work on a mobile phone?
yeah. And probably if you are producing a website in an Asian language, then there's going to be a lot more people who are going to be looking at it on their mobiles than the other way round. If I look at the split, for example, of my website traffic, the US traffic is predominantly, let's say, PC based or computer based, and the Asian traffic is predominantly mobile based.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's different types of mobile. Some people have, you know, virtually
Practically a
mini
laptop
tablets.
screen.
Exactly. You know, and some people prefer much smaller ones. So a lot of it is to do with that. And the days are gone where you build, I think, where you build two separate sites, you know, one for mobile and well, if you've got the, I mean, great, you know, I'll invoice you twice. But you just don't need to. No, I think in, you know, from the multi-language side, it all comes back to setting it up in the right way. I think the biggest issue for multi-language sites in the UK and the US is education. And by the way, when you know, this might or might not be a controversial thing to say, but despite what you hear on the news, there are as many opportunities today as there were in 2016 for doing business in the European Union. There are very big issues that have come about because of that. But if somebody is a service business and they can start building a brand internationally, you don't have to sign a customs declaration form to get your business in another language. And I think there's certainly in the UK at the moment, I've hung around with people from the DIT a lot, the Department of International Trade, and you know, you still do get this, oh well, you know, it's complicated and Brexit and this and the rest of it. Fine, absolutely, but it's still, you know, there's as many opportunities as there always were. What for me balances it out is that, like I said, technology has no borders.
Yeah.
So if you want to start getting clients in another country, you may not know where to start, but the easiest place to start is put your site. Let's say France. Let's say France, or well, would you want to start in France? Maybe you want to start in Spain. Let's say. So put your site in Spanish. You may have no clients in Spain. What does it cost you? Peanuts.
Yeah. And I
Well,
think it's what is it? The what's it called? The underwear effect. I think Catherine Bossman knows
the
this one.
underwear.
The underwear effect is that people are more likely to buy from a website which is in their home language.
Yes. Well, I'd go even one stage further than that. I'd say that if it's not in their language, they're not even going to look at it.
I think it depends what you're selling, because if you're selling B2B, then a lot of companies they're prepared to buy from an English website. But
Maybe. I mean, Amazon is in other languages. So the argument that I would make is that if you want to get into a local market, well, put it this way, you can't localize your product without having a localized website.
yeah.
So the big question in people's minds is, why do I need a multi-language website? Well, you don't. But if you do have one, it's going to be a lot easier to start building an international brand. So that's your first place to start, and that's a toe in the water. The second thing is, you can then say to yourself, well, what languages should I be putting it in? And I would turn the question around and I'd say, well, what are the easiest markets for you to sell into?
Yeah.
Why would you sell in? The other thing is that with some languages, you can sell into more than one market. So if it's Spanish, if it's French, if it's German, they all cover more than one market. Yes, there may be nuances in obviously the Belgians don't speak.
You're going to be lynched by all of the translators now for saying that Spanish and cover the South Americans as well.
Yeah, but I think the point being there is that it gets you a foot in the door.
Yes.
So let's be really British about this. A Belgian will be able to read the French website.
Yeah.
better than maybe an English one, and it will speak to them more. Again, this is, I think it's the ABC of doing international business. Um, so yeah, and I think the other thing is there is a misconception that people have about doing business internationally. If a website is going to be properly localized, it's got to be built up within, it's got to be built in the first place with internationalization in mind, but that comes back to your business. So I think somebody mentioned it before about translation is, you know, in an ideal world, the quality of the translator would be relative to how much that's going to be value in terms of value for the business.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing. I think, unfortunately, the value selling gets lost. It gets commoditized. Translations, languages, building websites in different languages, it gets too commoditized.
But on the other hand, if people don't have it, like we've said before, if they don't have it or they have it wrong, then, I mean, everybody has seen signs somewhere on holiday where they've looked at it and thought, that is so
No,
badly translated. And you just look at it, and if it's in something very small and you're on holiday in a tourist place, it doesn't actually impact your life. But if that is your business, then that can have some really bad impact.
oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the key message that I would say to people is, what would stop you um, from going multi-language? Because it's actually simpler than you think. Um, so, put aside how complex it might be to build, or the nuances of, the way business cultures operate in different countries, and how you do business. And, in France, we don't start talking about business till at least we've got to the dessert and all this sort of stuff. But it's, I think there's a value proposition in everything that's related to multilingual websites. Um, and I think that's the biggest challenge, is to show people how much it can actually bring them. And the same goes for, at the end of the day, a phrase translated properly will sell better than a phrase that is not.
Yeah. If it feels like an elegant translation, then it's going to bring you a lot more for your business than one that feels really clunky, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, my whole conversation with a client, if I come across a client, so let's say I'll look at a law firm, I'll look at their website, I'll see that they, as I say, let's take international patent attorneys, and I'll go, well, the clue is in the word international. So if you're an international patent attorney, they go, oh yeah, but all my clients deal in English. Well, yeah, they might do, but if you've got an office somewhere else, why don't we put your site in, if you've got an office in Spain, why don't we put your site in Spanish?
Yeah.
Because you've got an office there. So for me, that's like,
It's logical, isn't it, somehow?
it
At
is
least,
logical. So I think it's more about, and then the argument becomes more, it's like, why would you have a multilingual website? Well, do you want to build your brand internationally?
yeah.
Because, otherwise you won't. It's as simple as that. So the question mark then is to how to convince them to do it, and to do it with the right people. And that's a combination of being able to say, well, I've got what it takes, but there are other people who can do it as well. And it doesn't have to cost a fortune. And then, of course, you've got, it has to be mentioned in every conversation like this. You've got the people who say, well, can't I just put Google Translate plugin there? I've said it. But they do.
Yeah, yeah, they do.
And that's just, what can you do? It's, some people just don't get it. I'm being polite there. They just don't get it.
Yeah.
There's an article somewhere. I wrote this article many years ago about Captain Kirk and his Star Trek universal translator, and will machines ever replace humans? And they won't. So even if you're talking to a Klingon, your facial expression is very important. Absolutely. In Quebec. Yeah. Yeah, I remember going to Quebec, and yeah, their French is something else. It's yeah. I'm not going to say anything.
Yes, I've encountered that before now because for food law, when you've got to have things translated, then certain ingredients are obviously different between Quebecois and French.
Yeah, well, I used to play ice hockey, you see, so I was a mad about the well, not just the Toronto Maple Leafs, but I actually went to Quebec and had a little mess around on the ice once, but that's another story. Let's not go down that route. Um,
No, I think that would probably blow up our time frame for today.
it would
It's
do.
too
It would.
much. So
Have
yeah,
I answered? Are there any burning questions that
I
that I
don't
can
think
help
so.
anybody?
I've had an eye on the chat, and I don't think there were any other burning questions. I was just going to ask you as a kind of final question as we're wrapping up. If anybody is interested in obviously a multilingual website, which kind of clients do you focus on and specialize on? We've heard small, medium companies, we've heard patent attorneys, but as far as I know, you also deal with other companies as well, as long as they're prepared to listen to, as long as they're not what the Germans would call beratungsresistent and not capable of taking your advice.
Well, yes. I mean, if I'm the dog, they shouldn't be barking. And let's face it, I'm a web designer, so I am a dog. But in animal speak, what kind of clients? I will happily build a website for anybody. However, I'm not set up in a way that I could build for a corporate. I
Yeah,
just don't have the setup for it. Um, the sort of any kind of what I would call small. I mean, a small business can be anything these days, from one person to 500 people. That's the official designation of an SME. But and I do have a small team of people around me. They're not employed by me, but I work pretty much mostly with them. Graphic design. I have a coder who helps me with anything that I'm not capable of doing, which is quite a lot of things sometimes. And all of those different areas, I've got people around me. So the sort of people that I'll happily build a site for any business, starting it off with English and then going to other languages. It doesn't matter what they're in, as long as I'm able to do the job properly for them. And there are jobs that I have turned down because I just don't think I'm not the right person for it. And that may be to do with some particular complex functionality, which if I can't get my head around it, it's not me. So I'd rather pass it on to somebody else. So any kind of SME, from my point of view, doesn't really matter whether it's services or goods. I'm not an e-commerce specialist. I have built e-commerce sites. Most of the sites I've built have been static sites with some minimum functionality. But because once you get into international e-commerce, you get into currencies, etc., 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 foreign merchant gateways, international merchant gateways. Yes, I can manage that sort of project, but it's more likely to be professional services firms or small independent firms.
okay.
Yeah, that sort of thing.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today. It's been really interesting to listen. I'm sure we could have gone on for hours. We could have diverged off into music. We already learned what about favorite biscuits, so we're already covered for some of the more important questions that needed to be answered this afternoon. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to talk.
Thank you. I have enjoyed, and I hope we've got some thoughts going for the crowd. That's great. Thank you very much indeed for having me on.
Thank you.